Hollywood Halloween Horror Nights, Chris Williams.
Thank you so much, guys. Take it away.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I can't see any of you. How you guys doing? It's going to be a loud one in here today. We need your energy. Let's hear it.
Thanks for coming today, guys. Got some special stuff for you guys to check out.
All right. I'm John Murdy. I'm creative director, executive producer of Halloween Horror Nights.
I'm Chris Williams. I'm production designer, art director of Halloween Horror Nights.
And today what we're going to do is we're going to talk to you about a brand new maze that we announced earlier in the week. It's called Universal Monsters. Are you guys excited about that? Monitor down front. No monitor. All right. First of all, let's talk about what we're dealing with. Clicker. Run the gamut from some of the first movies ever made in the silent film era up to The Wolfman in 1941. Before we get into the maze, I just wanted to acknowledge, Universal Monsters has a rich, rich legacy. Obviously, there's all the actors that starred in these movies, but there's three people in particular that, to me, are kind of the unsung heroes of Universal Monsters. The man on the screen is Jack Pierce. Who's Jack Pierce?
Makeup.
Who's Jack Pierce? Makeup artist, that's right. Jack Pierce did the makeup. You can tell him, Chris.
Oh yeah, he did the makeup for Frankenstein's monster, as well as the Mummy, as well as other characters. And as a kid, I knew who he was actually, and he was really super as a kid and very inspirational to me, as well as others in the makeup industry. But he was somebody who's very special, a true visionary.
And Jack, the kind of makeup Jack did was out of the kit. Meaning everything, there wasn't molds, there wasn't foam latex back in those days. Everything had to be created out of the kit. And he worked on the Universal Monster movies from Frankenstein, Dracula in 1931, all the way up through The Wolfman in 1941. And what did he do at the very end of his career? Does anybody know? What was the last thing Jack Pierce did?
He died.
Mr. Ed. Do you know the TV show with the talks? And I are going to take you through our thought process, because we approach this with one goal overall, which is to scare the living fill in the blanks out of each and every one of you, but to do it with the Universal Monster characters, right? We were very lucky. We had help along the way. I mentioned our friends at Dark Universe and Universal Pictures, and we had help from an artist named Crash McCreary. I'm sure you guys know his work.
Yes.
He did Jurassic Park, Pirates of the Caribbean, Edward Scissorhands, on and on and on. One of the greatest creature designers in Hollywood, character designers, illustrators. He designed our key art. That's Crash's work.
Yeah, we're very fortunate to be able to have him work with us on these three characters for us, actually.
So, let's start, shall we?
Yeah.
These are the movies we're dealing with. Again, I mentioned at the beginning, it starts with the very beginning, the very first Universal Monster movie, 1923, Hunchback of Notre Dame, goes all the way up to The Wolfman, 1941. And one of the first things that we had to decide when we were conceptualizing this maze is, where do you begin? And of course, if you're going to do a Universal Monster movie, I think you begin, much like As Frankenstein begins, in a graveyard. So Chris and I always do a ton of research whenever we're doing something like this, and our research led us to Highgate Cemetery in London.
Yeah, and you can see a lot of this in respect to our inspiration that we're looking at doing, actually, and vines around statuary and big, large tombstones as well. One thing that I look at that might be a little bit different, because there's a lot of greenery in here. A lot of what you'll see is more dead foliage, more yellow, more gray, leafless trees, that kind of thing. So really enhance that look and set a certain tone right off the beginning in our cemetery.
So your maze experience is going to begin in the cemetery, but it's not just any cemetery. It's a cemetery where all the monsters are buried, right? And you, mortals, by your mere profane existence and trespassing into this sanctum of sanctums, you have caused the monsters to rise from their crypt, from their graves, and get you. So game on, right?
Yes.
But we also wanted to look at some other influences as well. This is Jim Morrison's grave. It's outside of Paris. If you ever go to this grave, has anybody ever been there in Paris, Morrison's grave? What's all over it? Graffiti, right? Everywhere the fans of graffiti, Jim, see you on the other side. Everywhere. We liked that idea, somebody like profaning a cemetery. And then we started doing more research and we found that all over the world, spontaneously, there is street art about the universal monsters. These are just two examples that we found in our research. So as you approach this cemetery, it's going to be tagged. It's going to have graffiti, street art on the front of some of the different universal monster characters and some of the quotes associated with the films. Once you go into the graveyard, you meet your first universal monster, and that of course is the king of all universal monsters, Frankenstein's monster. Now the way Chris and I approached the characters, because this is an original take on the classic Universal Monsters films, is we wanted to look at the inherent story of every single character. Because if you boil all these movies down to their core, and in the case of Frankenstein, we're talking about a book by Mary Shelley, right? 200 years old this year, right? The horror in that book is scarier to me than anything you could put on the screen today. At its essence, it is about a corpse. Actually, it's about many corpses that Dr. Frankenstein exhumes from the graveyard, stitches the various pieces together, jolts it to life with electricity, and then expects everything to just be fine. But it's not. Because the essence of Frankenstein is he is dead, and he has been brought back to life, but brought back to life in a forbidden way. So we tried to distill that down to its essence, and for us it's reanimated corpse. Again, we do our research, so these are just a couple of research images that Chris and I pulled. One of them's Walking Dead, the work of our good friend Greg Nicotero. And the other one is Frankenstein in one of the later Frankenstein movies when he's set on fire. And we wanted to combine those two things, so gave it to Chris. And this is our concept art that came out.
Yeah, so, hey, this is our original concept for that. You can see on the left side is the overall and the costume intent as well. And then on the right side is the more close-up look where we're really trying to push that exposed bone. You can see that with his skull, with the suture still tied into his skull as well, the rust and an extreme burn look as well, and really try to give him a more aggressive approach to this.
And then I mentioned we had our friend Crash McCreary who was able to help us out, and Crash, as I mentioned, I'll bring it back up again, that's the concept artist that Crash did, and he added some elements that we thought were super cool, like those exposed teeth. So we gave that, Chris and I, to our creature creator, who is Patrick McGee of McGee Effects, and I'm going to share with you what Patrick's done with the sculpt. It's like the forces of evil have been conspired.
Wow.
Talk about a tease, huh? Hang on, 2 seconds.
Extreme burn look to it, and kind of like this dislocated jaw with the exposed teeth, and we're gonna put in there like a dead eye, you know, because like what John was talking about, you know, he is essentially a zombie, and we're really just trying to pull all those and accentuate those specific features, like the flat top head and the bolts as well. And then we'll take all that, like the bolts and stuff, and rust all that down.
After you go through the graveyard, you come to the cemetery, you find an entrance to a crypt, you go inside the crypt, much like they did in Bride of Frankenstein. Outside of the crypt, there are statue characters. Oftentimes, Chris and I have done different gags over the years with Horror Nights called living statues. This is a variation on the living statue where, Chris, you can't even see this one's face.
Yeah.
Comes to life, comes after you, you go further into the crypt. And this is what I mean when I say Frankenstein at its core is as scary and disturbing as any modern horror film. Do you guys know who this little girl is? Maria, exactly right, little Maria. In the film, Frankenstein is playing that game with Maria by the lake where they're throwing flowers in the river and they run out of flowers. So what's he do? He picks up Maria, he throws her in the lake like a child because he can't understand. She drowns, her father picks him up in his arms, runs through the town crying. So we thought, for this maze, this is Maria's crypt that we're going into. Frankenstein's gone in there looking for his friend. He's found her. Unfortunately, he's found her grave. He's taken off the lid, and when you come into the scene, he's got Maria, but she's been in there for a while. And she's a decomposed corpse that's rotting away. That's not the only thing in this crypt. There's also all of the corpses that have been buried in here that come to life, multiple characters that come to life. And then somebody else invades the crypt, much like in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. The Wolfman. Now, when you distill the Wolfman down to his core element, really that story is about the beast within. The entire movie, The Wolfman, was written by a man who was Jewish, and the movie came out in 1941, right at the beginning of World War II for the United States of America. The man actually wrote the movie to be a metaphor for what was going on in the world at the time. That's what made these movies so scary when they came out back in the early days, the 30s or 40s, is they were speaking to their times very distinctly. In this case, if you looked around the world in 1941, it seemed like men were truly turning into beasts, and that's why this man wrote the screenplay for The Wolfman. So we wanted to bring that out, but we wanted to show that transformation process as opposed to the full transformation. So this was our original design, which you and I kind of went back and forth and weren't all that happy with, honestly.
That's our original intent. You know, we were trying to get some differences, but still push those really scary elements like the baring teeth as well. We're trying to pull up on, you know, the pointed ears, you can see, and really make him really aggressive and really intense.
So then I mentioned again, Crash got a hold of this and he did his magic with it, as you can see, and this is the sculpt for our Wolfman.
Yeah, this is through McGee Effects. It's sculpted out of oil-based clay that you can see really the fine details within around his eyes and everything. So they put elevations, and I do them actually in scale. Some stuff are like a little small 1/4 inch or even 1/8 inch scale. And then what I do is I give my little drawings to my art team. So this elevation was done by Troy Zimmerman, which you guys might know who that guy is anyway. So as we approach our castle, you know, it'll look like it's on fire. And through the windows, we'll have smoke roll out. You can see the fire through the inside.
Also projection too.
Yeah, as well as up above. You know, the castle's on fire, but the doctor's inside working. And you can tell by the electrical equipment above working and going off. And you'll see that as we approach. So look, we were really also trying to make the castle kind of, in a sense, be its own character. So I think you can kind of see like the face within, kind of like this little bit of a skull kind of face within, to try to make that facility really just look like a castle and the face within it. And then that you have to enter into its mouth. Long, crazy beards for them, and really try to push the age, but make them very scary. Yep. You can see that.
And then once you go into the castle, it's all in fire, the beams are falling down, you get attacked by Frankenstein again. Frankenstein, in fact, is the character you're going to see the most in this attraction. But then you come into an area where it says vault, and you enter inside, and it's a film vault. It's literally a film vault. It's the place where all of the monster movies are stored. And what the villagers are trying to do is to burn it all down. They're trying to destroy the Universal monsters. There's actually a screen set up with an old projector, and on that projector we're going to be projecting the original theatrical trailer for Frankenstein. And then the monster is going to bust through the screen and attack you. And as you go further into the castle, you start going down these hallways. And that's where you meet the next character. That's the Invisible Man. Again, we went to our research and inspiration for what to do for the Invisible Man. And actually, Chris and I looked back on an effect we did for Halloween 2, Hell Comes from Haddonfield.
Yeah.
Can you describe how we did this?
And you can see how we did this. We did this with UV fluorescent lighting, as well as fluorescent painting, where we had those skull pumpkin forms glowing, like you can tell. Then we had those floating without, kind of like in space, in this black void. And then we had costume characters wearing these masks, and they're all in blackout. So that theory is the same theory that we're pushing forward to our Invisible Man look.
Yeah. So this is the design for the Invisible Man, and all the areas that you see have disappeared. That's how we're doing that effect. So you're going to run into him in the castle, and as you're going through the scene, you're going to hear organ music in the distance, as if somebody's playing an organ. Who can that be? Phantom of the Opera.
That's our inspiration for the music.
So how we approach the castle is to find a reason for why all these characters would be located within it, because all these movies take place in different countries, in different time periods. We looked at all the rooms you would typically have in a castle or a manor house, and then we found a reason for why one of our Universal Monster characters would exist in that room. So obviously for Phantom of the Opera, it's the music room. So this is just some research that we did when we were thinking about what we wanted that to look like. This is Chris's elevation. You can describe what we're doing with the statues.
This is one of the elevations of inside the music room, and it shows one big wall essentially, and through those arches are essentially plexi, so we can get some water effects. So we're down within the Phantom, but we're trying to let you and get an idea that we might be within the canals as well, and as well as we're going to do one of these living statue gags. As you see this elevation, we're going to walk parallel to this wall, and you know what we do is one of these things is not like the other in respect to the statues, and maybe some of them will come to life, maybe they won't.
You never can tell.
You never can tell.
Oh. And then we come to the Phantom himself, who's seated behind the organ. For inspiration for the Phantom, you know, obviously there's the original character done by Lon Chaney. This is also from some of the later sequels. You know, in some iterations of the story, he was burned by acid. That's what caused his face to become disfigured. But when we look back to some of our sequels that we made to Phantom of the Opera, it's kind of tame as far as the level of detail of that scarring and that burn. And so we looked at movies like, you know, the Batman franchise, and the Two-Face character, took that as inspiration, gave it to our designers.
And then that's the intent, our intent. And you can see it's really extreme with that acid burn and that really exposed eye, and around by his cheeks, all that muscle tissue and sinew.
And then we gave it to Patrick McGee. Just doesn't want to do it, does it? There it goes.
There you go.
And that's the sculpt for the Phantom character.
So this sculpture actually, for somebody's got a silicone actually, and we've done those lately, and you guys have seen those, and by trying to get a translucent skin look, we can get those veins to look as though they're underneath the skin.
And then for the design of Dracula, this is what our artist came up with. But again, we had Crash working with us too, so we took that a little bit farther, and that's the sculpt.
That's a finished product of the sculpt.
There's also Dracula's brides. There we go. One more. And in the original film in 1931, they're pretty much like these fanatical followers. So that's what we kind of keyed into for these characters. They're the fanatical followers of Dracula, but we wanted to amp up the level of gore. That's why you see the picture of Carrie. So, gave this to our artists.
And they would be covered in blood, you know, you would think that, you know? And that's what we did. And, you know, also we attached kind of like their little cape to their hands and try to get them a little bit more, you know, bat-ish a little bit.
And this exaggerated in the makeup too, with the ears and the facial features. In fact, this is the sculpt. Every time I do one, I get 12. There we go.
Yeah.
That's the sculpt for one of the vampire brides. And then once you leave that scene, you come to the collection room. You know, if you've ever been in a castle, oftentimes they have a room where they collect everything that they've pillaged from all over the world, suits of armor, oftentimes there's Egyptian artifacts. So we wanted to build a collection room that has sarcophaguses in them, but also, and there's an elevation for Chris that shows the sarcophagus, and then there's a table in there that's like part of an archaeological dig.
Yeah, we made a table. One of our prop guys, Luis Rodriguez, made this table. You'll see it when you get in there. It looks really cool. And, you know, most of the time, we put a ton of furniture in. You can see that long wall with the sarcophagus, and it's kind of bare for a collection room. But to be totally honest with you, nowadays we've got so much cool furniture and cool prop pieces at our warehouse. You know, we just left it bare, and then we went and did a shopping trip at our warehouse where we picked out certain specific pieces that would go in here, as well as furniture that we can house more of the collection.
So this will be like an Easter egg section of the maze. As you're coming through, you'll try to find the scroll from the mummy and all of the different artifacts that are associated with all the Universal monsters. But you'll also see specimen displays of like spiders and insects. And of course that means the character of Renfield. He's also in the room. But for the mummy, what we really wanted to key into is mummification is not a happy thing. It's an incredibly painful way to die. If you know anything about ancient Egypt, all the things they did to you in the process of burying you alive was horrific, and that pain should show on your face. So Chris and I did a lot of research with mummies, as you can see. Some of these are mummies they found in Mexico. Some of them are the bog people from Ireland and other parts of Europe. But if you look at their faces, you can see how they died. They look like they're in agony. And we wanted our character to look like that as well. So this is our design for the mummy.
Yeah, we took that what John's talking about, that scream, and took that and made it more aggressive, as though that mummy is really out to get you, and it's super aggressive. So you can see it that we wanted a bare teeth and a big furrowed brow and no eyes.
And this is the sculpt for the mummy that's being done by McGee Effects right now. And I think this is Jordu too.
Yeah, and if you really look closely, look at all that leathery work looking around the texture around its cheeks and stuff. This is really, truly an awesome sculpture.
And then I mentioned that there's another character in the scene. He's from the movie Dracula. His name is Renfield. For Renfield, we kind of keyed in on two different things. Victorian madness was the main thing we were looking for. That picture that you see of the guy in the striped shirt, that is what a Victorian mental patient looked like. The other picture you see is the man who laughed, Conrad Veidt. We really liked that crazy, exaggerated smile from that early film, so we combined those two things together to give us our version of Renfield, which looks like this. And you know, Renfield, he doesn't prey on humans like Dracula and his brides do. He eats insects and small rodents. So if you look closely in his hand, he's got a rat that he's literally ripped in half, and he's in the process of devouring all of the blood from the rat. So it's staining his face and it's all over his clothes. So he also has a little bit of a Joker feel to him as well. And this is the sculpting process for Renfield.
And we're really getting that bug eye look, that crazy eye. And then we'll go ahead and paint those eyes, and then we'll cut a slit above for the performer to see out, much like our Walking Dead mask that you guys have seen in the park.
And then we're coming towards the end of the maze at this point, so we're heading towards the lab. And as you're heading towards the lab, you're hearing all of the trademark sounds coming from the lab, the sounds of all of the electrical gadgets going off, the thunderstorm happening. You still hear the villagers outside trying to burn the place down. You're hearing the classic lines from Frankenstein, "It's alive, in the name of God, now I know what it feels like to be God." And in the research for how we wanted this to look, these are some of the images we pulled. Obviously, the image of the black and white image is the electrical gadgets from the movie Frankenstein. But we noticed in certain parts of the world, they have a really haphazard way of doing electricity. I think this is from either Bangladesh or India, but this is like a telephone pole outside somebody's house. And you can see where the wires are just strung everywhere. And we thought in the early days of electricity, they wouldn't be that neat. There should be wires that are just going everywhere in Dr. Frankenstein's lab, because it is the birth of electricity. So, this is just one wall elevation, also getting those trademark windows, Chris.
Yeah, just taking a little peek of that, and it is the trademark windows, you know, it's kind of that German impressionistic style for those times in the 30s that we pulled all those little bit of angles and such, and created those windows very similar to what you see in Bride of Frankenstein as well. And, you know, vacuum form walls.
Hunchback of Notre Dame, he's going to be one of the featured characters in the Scare Zone, kind of like the King of Fools festival that took place in the movie. And that's the sculpt. No, we're so close. There we go. Oh, that's the sculpt for Hunchback. And then the masquerade characters themselves are all going to be iterations of the monsters, but done stylistically. So there's an Egyptian character, there's a vampire character, there's a wolf character, there's a Frankenstein's monster character, and they're all attending this Dance of the Dead, this masquerade ball. And then proceeding over the whole thing is the Mask of the Red Death version of the Phantom of the Opera, except he is a stilt walker about 9 feet tall. And he's going to be presiding over the whole thing, and that's the Universal Monsters Maze. And you know what? You guys have been so patient and so cool that I need to pay you back because you guys had to sit through all these interruptions and all these distractions. And ladies and gentlemen, Slash. Right on. So Slash, let's go back in time for a second. We all met in 2013 when you came to Halloween Horror Nights, right?
Right.
And what did you come to see that you wanted to see more than anything?
Well, you know what it was? I just came for the whole thing. I kept hearing how great Halloween Horror Nights was. So I finally came down there, and then you and I met, and we went to the Black Sabbath maze.
I was like, yeah, definitely. So I got to work on working out a cool sort of theme for the entire thing. I hooked up with Stacy here, and we started working together like we did the last time, but this time was a lot more extensive. I got a guitar synthesizer, I started doing all kinds of orchestrations for different instruments, doing this basic idea and all different kind of musical tones and because of the different periods, you know, and the different kinds of monster themes, having different versions of this same melody with different feels and different instrumentation. And then I worked tightly here with State.
Crank it up, let's rock and roll.
Featuring Slash, everybody.